So yeah, we're back again with my esteemed guest, the Doc, with episode number I don't know, fuck. But this we have like a special guest because he is really in tuned with the brain, the mind, and specifically, he wanted to like uh, probe my mind a little bit, like jog my mind, and like pick my brain as to yeah the Ronin Vagabond aspects that seemed to interest him. I think it was also him. Like, was it you that read the Sharp books? Was it you that read the Sharp books?
Oh, oh yeah, I'm a huge
Right?
fan of the Sharp series.
Yeah. I haven't finished the series because, but it's such a addiction for me. The Sharp's books when I was younger, that Sharp also had a lot of the qualities that we talk about. He was like an outsider, pariah, but he was still in the army. But he was forced into that actually. But yeah, we can talk a little bit about that as well. But yeah,
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, he was. I think he was out of his element because he was just a sergeant. That because of his heroism, they made him an officer, and in
yeah.
that era, you had to pay for it. So he was just around a bunch of rich people who weren't good officers. Now he
Yeah,
was a good officer, but he couldn't afford promotion. I
yeah,
loved that character
yeah.
because he still did the right thing, but
Hmm.
there was no pompousness. There was no yeah. He was a great military man, great
Yeah,
military character.
yeah. For people that don't know this is written by Bernard Cornwell. It's a really old series. It's called the Sharp series. I read it when I was a kid, so I can only imagine when Doc read it. But it influenced you to go into the military. You told me, or something like that. That's why I remembered it.
It was one he was one of the he was one of my influences. I think for me it was a lot of the historical context because it was the
Mm,
Napoleonic era,
mm,
Napoleonic Wars,
beautiful. Yeah.
and yeah, I was really into reading military strategy at the time. I think
Yeah.
preeminent besides Napoleon himself, there was Jomini, and then the Franco-Prussian military
Hmm.
strategists, von Clausewitz.
Yeah.
So as I was learning about of these military movements and strategies, being able to have Bernard Cornwell's just character, his really well written character, just placed in the middle of those events, and he did his research. It was such a well researched
Yeah.
series. It was like reading through a history book and being a
Yeah.
part of it.
For example, which one was it? The Trafalgar one, for example, Sharp's Trafalgar.
Mhm.
Sharp was almost like a side character there, and we are just checking how Nelson was like slaying all these other dudes, you know?
I really wish that I could remember the
Yeah,
specifics because
yeah.
it's been a long time. I actually have a handful of them in my
Shit,
collection somewhere,
that's
but
amazing.
he the it's I have a hard time remembering which events happened in which
Yeah, for sure.
series, but
Yeah,
I remember a lot of the highlights, like how he got his sword or how he got his boots, and
yeah,
things along the like
the big ones, the
when
cool ones.
just every because it played a lot like just some of those old heroic fantasy stories where
Hmm.
they're not magical items, but he's at war and he has threadbare clothing, and every once in a while he gets just really nice things, and they
Yeah, yeah,
help
yeah.
him. And
Yeah, I know what you mean. Exactly.
I can't tell you how many times that's been a moment in my life where a mentor has just given me a book or has given me a piece of advice, and I think that he carries that, and it strengthens him, it equips him.
Can you tell me a little bit about mentors in life? Do you feel that mentors are just given to you, or you can search for them, or how does one prepare for mentors? What is your experience on that?
That's a very hard question. I It's been very rare in my life that I've actually approached a person and asked them to be my mentor. It's happened, and out of that has been some of the most enriching relationships in my life. But for the most part, I'd say the most influential mentors that I've had, they were given to me. Life assigned them to me. I didn't find them.
Yeah,
Um, but they I think they collected me as well. That was the part of it. There was a time where maybe I was struggling or I needed a little bit of help, and then somebody who was just the right person came along and just grabbed me on the shoulder and said, "You, we're gonna do we're gonna do some rad shit together. Let's go."
yeah.
And
What
you
kind of
know
things
that
did you do? Was this like related to your military business or?
Um, I would say probably the most influential mentor I had was a soldier and an officer.
Mhm,
Actually, it was a very unconventional relationship. Um, I had injured myself in training,
mhm,
pretty bad, and they're paying me. I'm a government employee, so even though I'm injured, they find work for you.
mhm.
So I found my time working with a chaplain. Now
Hmm,
this
that's interesting.
gentleman was yeah, this gentleman was a uh, he was former airborne infantry soldier. He'd
Mhm,
already been in for about 16 years. He saw war. He
mhm,
saw suffering, and
mhm,
as a result, he made a conscious switch from being a killer to a healer. And he
mhm,
talks about it. That's part of his story, and that's sort of his narrative that he likes to tell people,
mhm.
and that how God helped him go
Yeah.
from being a killer to a healer. And he was just instrumental in my journey to becoming a healer myself.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for him, I don't know what I would have done. And there were times where I thought about, going into a different field or
Mhm,
quitting, and he wouldn't put his foot down. And anytime I needed help, he in academia you get your letters of recommendation, but
mhm.
he went above and beyond. He would call the places and tell them why they should hire me.
Yeah,
He was
for sure.
very he was he was a guy. He was a good guy.
Yeah. Was it something specific that he was saying, or what he did, or how he was? What does it feel for you that he was like a mentor? What was the imprint of him on you? What was it about?
I think it was the relationship itself. First, he came at a time I needed it, and that was perhaps the most critical component was
Yeah, so
timing.
it's like
I needed
kismet.
it.
Yeah,
I
by the
needed the
universe.
mentor in that moment.
Mhm,
And he he had a lot of ambitious projects that he was working on, but he was not. I'll be very frank about this. He was dyslexic.
mhm,
He couldn't read and write very well. He
mhm,
had the ideas, and he was a hard worker, and he was probably one of the most intelligent people on the planet. But when it came to words, wasn't his strength. So he brought me on sort of to provide dictation, edit, uh, switch some things around, and so in many ways I was helping him out, but it was through that time that we got to know each other, and
mhm,
we were spending a lot of time together, and he just took on that role where he imparted the wisdom or he pushed. Like he 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 pushed his it was he had no need to. We were doing the bare minimum. I was doing my job. He was doing his job. But
mhm.
that wasn't enough. He said, okay, now here's some other things. Here's some things that you can do more. Here's some
Yeah.
things where you can do to improve yourself. Here's ways where you can. He made me be more involved in my community
Mhm.
as well. He talked about that being a necessity, a necessary part of um, fellowship of living is community.
Yeah. How do you feel about the importance of somebody being involved in XYZ community? What does it mean for you?
Can you say that one more time?
What do you think the role of you is in a certain community? How do you think that influences your mental health, or what are you talking about, your societal contribution, or how do I see that?
Hmm. Well, in many ways, I think we want to go from periphery to core. On at the widest range, I am a citizen of the world, and I do think
Mm-hmm.
that I have a responsibility
Yep.
um, to make the world better, whatever that means. So I want to
Mm-hmm.
help people. If people are sick, I want to do my best to help them become well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but then, all the way down to the most local. it would be, where I live or my direct family or myself. And I think of yeah, maybe we're going to slide into a little bit of the Buddhist consideration, but I think
Yeah.
if I work on myself, if I make sure that I focus on being a moral and meaningful contributor to society, then society is better as a whole, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. So the more that if I eat well, if I exercise, if I'm polite, if I'm helpful, then
Mhm.
society is better as a
Yeah.
whole. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of the way I think of my role in society.
Yeah, no, it, it got me thinking at least. It reminds me, for example, of the framework of Hero class circle. The outer circle is basically, oh, it's a little bit what you said, the periphery to the core. The core is you, the inner circle,
Hmm.
and then you go outwards. Or it's like that metaphor, always put on your oxygen mask first when the plane is crashing before you put it on somebody else. It's always like that.
Yeah, and at the same time, I've gone through periods of time where I had nothing and people helped me, and if I'm doing well and I'm in a position where I can help others, I I will pay that forward. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I will stop. I will pull over the side of the road to jump a car,
Mm-hmm.
because there were times where I needed help and I remembered how hard it was asking for people to give me a jump.
Yeah,
So because of that, anytime so I don't care if I'm running late. If
yeah,
somebody is asking me for a jump, I'm gonna help them.
yeah. What do you mean by jump? Like push start the car or like pick him up?
Yeah, I the jumper cables,
Oh yeah,
restarting their battery,
yeah.
getting yeah, it's winter. Winter's been really rough here,
Yeah.
and
Some from
the
Texas, snowy shit. Yeah.
yeah, I'm thankfully it's not as bad here as it is in
Yeah.
Texas or my friends in Chicago who have just feet of snow.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had to jump out of my car multiple times to help push someone or get someone out of a ditch. It's miserable out there. And
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of that anymore, but I don't see that a lot in my current community. I live in a much more urban environment these days, but
Mm-hmm.
a few years ago I lived in a very rural and a very, very rural environment. I had clients where if they had neighbors within 3 miles of them, they'd move because that's too close.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of community was it didn't matter who you were, what you looked like. If you were in distress or if you had any trouble, everyone
Yeah.
would pull over. There was a time where I saw someone with a flat tire, and a car pulled over behind him to help him, and a car pulled over behind them to help that guy, and a car pulled over behind them to help.
I've never seen that happen in my whole fucking life. Like, if that would happen, I have to buy the fucking lottery or something. Like,
It's wild, but I love that kind of community mentality. You looked out for your neighbors. You looked out for your neighbors in that town.
yeah. Mm, we jumped in a little bit like in medias res, like out of the get go. Can you clue in the audience a little bit your background, not per se your credentials, but who you are, like
Hmm.
your background with the military, the VA, the things that you told me you're interested in neurophysiology and those kinds of things, really. Just a little bit backdrop. Because maybe for some people, they were like, yo, this guy, what the fuck are these guys do?
All right, so I joined the army in 2009. Um, I branched armor. I have always had a thing for cavalry and history.
Yeah,
So I, I'm allergic to horses, so I thought the
yeah.
next best thing would be tanks. And
Yes.
I think
Did you do artillery or just armor?
tanks. I have a thing for tanks. I think tanks are the coolest thing in the world. You know they're they're not the most comfortable when you're over 6 feet tall, but they are just the coolest things in the world.
Did you watch the
Um,
movie Fury, by the way?
I don't want to. I'm sorry.
The movie Fury with the tanks.
Say again.
Fury, the movie. The movie
Oh,
with Brad Pitt, Fury.
I haven't.
It's a good movie by
Yes.
David Ayer.
So I actually have not seen. I have not seen Fury, and I'm kicking myself in the butt over it because that is exactly the kind of movie that I that I love and
Yeah.
would love to see. But I also I want to say that I don't want to steal any valor here. I was never deployed. I did not see combat.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I was injured in training, so
Yeah.
my career was cut short.
Yeah, it happens to a lot of
As a
guys.
result, it it was I'm okay with it now. It was actually pretty rough at the time, but because of my mentor, and he pushed me to find new ways to serve, and that's what pushed me into military psychology, VA hospital work, uh, things of that nature, because that was my way to still serve my country, to serve the troops. And
Mhm.
I never knew it at the time, but I have done more good as in mental health than I ever would have as a tank officer.
Yeah.
Uh, but that's kind of where it all came together, where I loved history, I loved the military, I loved psychology, and now I've just found a way to
And
wrap
in the
all
center,
of them in one.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to zoom in on the mental health aspect a little bit, but I want to like you talk a lot about the Napoleonic Wars, the military strategy, and your love for the artillery. Why were you like a history buff for that? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like,
uh, I got that more from my family. My family are all big readers. My grandfather was World War II veteran. Well, actually, three of my four grandparents were World War II veterans, but my paternal grandfather just he never stopped studying the war.
mhm. Yeah.
Documentaries, books. Um, Anytime a general was
Mhm.
interviewed, he would try to record it. He's History has just always been a big part of my family. So growing up around the time when I learned to read, and I read every book that I could get my grubby little hands on, most of them were about history,
Yeah.
and most
I
of them
get
were
it.
about military history. A lot of them were about cavalry charges.
Yeah.
Um,
I get it.
so
Any
that
particular battles that stuck out then, or was it how do I say like was it just like for you stories, or was it the war aspect? What was it that you loved about, or like was it just passed on? How do I see this?
I I I think there was the childhood um heroism. It's that idea that when you're a kid and you look at the soldier, they are the epitomis
Hmm.
hero.
Yeah, the hero archetype. Yeah.
They are looking death in the eye. They're doing it stoically, and but of course, if I'm reading about it, they've made it out. As a child, you can't really comprehend the horror of D-Day, of something like Omaha Beach. That
Yeah, for sure.
you think that, oh yeah, that would be cool for me to
Hmm.
have stormed that beach in Omaha.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
No, no.
no, you probably wouldn't have made it.
Hmm. Yeah, no, no. Especially that the Omaha Beach, people were, yeah, to put it a little bit bluntly, what I saw like from, for example, Saving Private Ryan, people were just like with the machine gun on the beach. Like maybe 1 in 20 survived or something. It was brutal.
Oh, there the thing that did it for me was, I think I was in high school. It was a video game. It was
Hmm.
on one of the Xboxes. It
Yeah.
was I can't remember if it was Call of Duty or if it was Medal of Honor, but they actually
Medal of
played
Honor.
a
Yeah.
D-Day where you
Yeah.
would go in on a boat. Yeah, and I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to put it on the hardest difficulty, where if you get hit by one bullet, it's game over. And I just want to see how far I'll get, because then it would be kind of a realistic simulation.
Uh-huh.
Because
Yeah.
maybe I'd get 20 feet, maybe I'd be lucky, maybe I'd make it all the way to the top and beat
Uh-huh.
the level.
Yeah.
I didn't. I I died like that, and I remember putting the controller down and saying, yeah, that's that's probably how far I would have gone. That's
Yeah.
probably as far as I would have made.
Like a mini
And
simulation. Yeah. Gotcha.
and ever since then, I've just was madly in love with what it took to be a soldier. Like
Yeah.
what mentally goes on
Yeah.
in people. because people did survive that. I think there
Hmm.
were 2 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Montgomery had command of 2 million people
Hmm.
on D-Day,
Yeah.
and they lived the whole rest of their lives. They didn't talk
Yeah.
about it. They pretended everything was okay. No,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah. Yeah.
we're all fine.
Yeah. Um, what I was hearing from how do you say, like your love for these like military history is, for me, how I see it, it's like these periods of times are like moments to showcase both good and evil traits of the human condition, basically. Because people like to use the word valor, because I do know, like, for example, they always say they would die for their brother, but the other side would do it as well. So it showcases basically the whole human psychology, basically. Bravery, fear, courage, evil, hate, all those little minutia.
Oh, yeah, and also while maintaining order and command. That
Hmm.
I mean, I think about because it's real. There's not a lot of civility in war.
Hmm.
There's there's there there's rules of war.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Usually there aren't rules in war.
Yeah,
So
the
this
ROE,
is
right? Rules of engagement.
all hell and
Yeah,
exactly. But
you have to
so
sign
while
these
all of
chits.
this is going on,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think what I'm trying to say is I think about like General Sherman in the American Civil War. He is famous for his March to the Sea,
Hmm.
which was just total destruction. He just
Hmm.
annihilated
Hmm.
everything in his path,
Yeah.
and it
Go
was
on.
brutal. And it's probably one of the most controversial. Um, well, total war is controversial. You burn the crops. There's no food
Yeah,
for
scorched earth.
the
Yeah.
soldiers to eat.
Yeah.
Therefore, they're more likely to surrender. But the
Hmm.
thing is that uh, during his entire operation, there was only one rape recorded, and the
Hmm.
soldier that did it was hanged for it.
Okay.
So even while General Sherman, so even while General Sherman was doing probably one of the most atrocious acts of warfare in
Yeah.
history, he did it as a gentleman.
Yeah.
He said, "No, no, no, we're not monsters. We have
It
to do
rem-
this. We
I
have
want to
to do
chime
this."
in a little bit. This reminds me a little bit of Sharp.
Please. Hmm.
It reminds me of Sharp. Uh, for example, they were sacking cities. They were plundering it, and all these guys were doing crazy as shit. And he was like, "Yo, bros, just chill down. The spoils of war will be spread like in a civilized way." That was quite interesting to see the angle that Bernard Cornwell tried to show, that like these type of soldiers did exist. Of course, all the other shit was happening. Of course.
But that's relatively new to history.
Yeah.
Historically, that's those were the spoils. The what drew people into the military. Rome was famous for this. That after you won a battle, the soldiers, hey, so long as you're in formation tomorrow, there's no rules for the rest of the
Yeah.
night. I'm gonna go turn in, guys. I'll see you tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
And the
No.
soldiers were like, "This is why we do it. Time to
Yeah.
rage."
Hmm. I feel you, Doug. That
Uh,
reminds me of, like, I was listening to this podcast about how the Greeks were like really brutal. The Greeks slaughtered each other like viciously, or so.
mhm.
Yeah, it's brutal, man. Yeah.
It was tribes. I think Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan as well. Like there was both brutality and order and orderliness. There was a strategy to it. But yeah, at the end of the day, it was all right. We win. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Until
Yeah.
then, drink, eat, and there are no rules.
No, yeah, it's definitely fascinating. It reminds me, like, something that you wanted to talk about. Like, you were talking now a little bit about order, and this is maybe like a jump to like code, honor. Like that Bushido code. Like in Hagakure. How do you feel?
Hmm.
How do you feel? What is the place of like code in this whole warriorism, battles? What does code have to do with these things?
I think it's a fundamental necessity
Hmm.
for warfare because otherwise it is just that tribal the Greeks were because if you
Yeah.
look at actually how little territory that actually was.
Hmm.
Greece, on the grand scheme of things, is one modern country of land, but they were just small
Yeah,
tribes
that's
that
crazy.
would just beat each other on the chest, take swords, and stab each other until someone says, "This is mine now."
Hmm.
And the only thing that kind of separates us from tribalism is that is some code of ethics, and I think even goes beyond tribalism. I would say even brutalism or animalism. That
Hmm.
we're not just going in and beating up our neighbors for fun. That you know I
Hmm.
think what I'm trying to say is
Yeah.
that it's a fundamental necessity to make sure that we're doing it for a purpose, and
Hmm.
that purpose would be, it's hard for me to say just, because what is a just reason for
Hmm.
conflict?
Okay.
But if we can't, if there's not good behind it, then it's responsibility. I think that's the word I'm looking for. I'm kind of floundering here, but I think it's a moral responsibility
Hmm.
to have some sort of a code of ethics,
Yeah,
especially
but
if you're hurting people.
yeah, I was hearing there the word just or responsible. Who do you feel that has the right or the might? You know, sometimes they say might is right. Who do you then feel is
Yeah.
who gets to decide this? Do you feel? What's your take on that?
Uh, this is this is a very kind of cold answer, but it's whoever's in charge. Because it was, I think it was Voltaire that had the joke that that God. It's funny how God tends to favor the largest battalions. Uh, the joke
Yeah,
that you know whoever has the biggest standing army is most
yeah,
likely going to win, and
mhm,
they then get to make the rules. So
yeah,
they could either do they could destroy everything, they could, or they could make it better. And
yeah,
history has consistently um, praised
hmm,
those that tried to make it better,
hmm,
and history has consistently vilified people like Hitler or Stalin,
hmm,
who made things worse for people.
hmm,
And it's I'm glad that history does it. We
yeah,
shouldn't
for sure.
forget these guys.
Yeah, reminds me a little bit about how they say like winners write the history. You know, what you see in the history books, winners wrote that. Yeah. Or funny that you brought up Stalin. They have like a famous meme almost. Um, what is it? Kill a couple people, you're a murderer, but kill millions. They were talking about Stalin. It's a statistic or
Hmm.
something. It's quite the
Yeah.
way to look at things. I'm not saying I'm not adhering to this philosophy or belief, but it's the way, like with the military and the wars. It's crazy
Hmm.
how perspective gets really changed in what is right, what is wrong, and this whole conceptualization.
Yeah. Actually, probably my favorite book in my collection right now is a history book from North Korea, which is in English. It's translated in English, and it is their account of the unjust imperialistic
Mm,
uh, war of American aggression, and it's such a beautiful
yeah.
piece of propaganda. How much they talk up, how bad America was and how great and brilliant military strategists
Yeah.
North Korea was. And
Mhm.
I just love it as a stark contrast to the history that you find here in the United States of the Korean War. And
Very
just
contrasting. Yeah,
it's
because that's history, you know. Like, yeah.
yeah, they're yeah, we talk about it as if we're the only writers of
Mhm.
history.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
true.
even in the United States, it has a huge focus on European history, classical history.
Yeah, for sure. Western
Not a
canon,
lot.
basically.
It barely even touches on ancient history, but not a lot of Middle Eastern history or Asian history. I think the common American doesn't know anything about world, especially Asian history.
Yeah, yeah. So what's really interesting, like I brought up like the Hagakure, because of like the samurai stuff, the Ronin stuff. What were any like things that it was a long time that you read it, but what jogged your mind, or what resonated with you and in tangent with me in a relationship with me and that you want to bring forth. What do you feel like?
Um, I don't think I understand the question. You,
It's
could you
like
repeat it?
you have like these big military classics, like
Mhm.
Sun Tzu's Art of War. You have Hakakure. What do you think that was so mind blowing for you back then when you're reading these quote unquote tomes of moral philosophy, military history that stuck with you, that you think would like you want to bring out?
That's 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 a really good question. I think I think the moral philosophy came more from the exposure, because I think I went through a period of time where I was really into black and white movies,
Yeah, for
and
sure. Okay.
post World War II Japan,
Yeah,
they
sure.
morally they weren't in the best spirits. They kind of lost. Uh, so what they did afterwards is they really
Yeah.
jumped into cinema, and when they looked back and they really romanticized or glorified that samurai ethic, they tried to do it with a very heroic angle. So the movies that came out in the 1950s and the 1960s out of Japan were just these very heroic samurai stories. And I think I was just inspired by those characters because it was more than just that. It was that national pride was really coming through from the storytellers, from the directors, and I wanted to learn more about that. And it was through that I was exposed to the Hagakure, or even going even more towards the Chinese side, the
Yeah.
Tao, and um, and I think I think through that I learned more like kind of about the romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is probably the most famous story of just military tribes just going against each other, and I couldn't get enough of it. It was through my consumption of a lot of this media that I started going, hey, there's some themes here. I think these themes of morality and
Yeah.
strategy. They're very aware of the cruelty of life and and that we die and we suffer, and
Yeah.
also that there can be this great beauty in between in that time that we're alive.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that beauty aspect, like because you mentioned the word suffering. What
Hmm.
I'm still trying to like piece together. What is it that's so intriguing to you? Because you it's because of course a little bit desensitization, a little bit, to put it a little bit
Hmm.
crudely, your history, with seeing these things, talking with these vets. But I'm trying to picture a younger Doc, as in, what was it? It cannot be only exposure by family. What is it for you? Is it
Hmm.
this romanticism that you sketched upon a little bit, or what else is there? You think?
The military service has touched my life throughout my since I was born, and not even just my family.
Hmm.
Actually, my my family goes back to the American
Yeah.
Revolutionary War. Both my great
Shit.
great 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 grandfather, John and Lemuel Perrin, were
Huh?
both in the battles of Lexington,
Shit.
the very first military engagement in the American Revolutionary
Yeah. Yeah.
War. Uh, my family have been American soldiers since there were American soldiers, all except for uh,
Hmm.
Korea and Vietnam.
Yeah.
Um, but it's touched it's that influence has been around even since I was a kid, even since before I was a kid. My great grandfather, who was a World War I veteran, he was an ambulance driver
Hmm.
because
Yeah. Like Hemingway.
he was against killing. Like Hemingway, yeah. They may have bumped elbows without knowing. He never recovered. The
Okay.
rest of his life,
Yeah.
he had night terrors. He had an aggression problem. He got in fights. It impacted how he raised my grandfather.
Of
It
course.
impacted how
Okay.
he interacted with my dad and his brothers.
Gotcha. Yeah.
It it was a very enormous component of even why his all of his children served in World War II, why they all signed up right away before the draft.
Yeah.
And but I think probably another one of the more meaningful personal components was I graduated high school
Mm-hmm.
during the initial siege in Iraq. So
Mm-hmm.
my peers went with the cheerful heroism of, yeah, we're gonna win a war, and they go and we do within weeks. Like, Iraq is, we won, and they came back and they were fundamentally different people.
Okay.
Many suicides. I think
Yeah.
I've survived. I think I know more people who, more of my friends who have served in the military have died by suicide
Mm-hmm.
than have died by small arms fire, mortars, IEDs. I've lost a few to small arms fire and IED, but more to suicide than anything else. So
Yeah.
I think the contrast of it, because even people who are proud of their military service
Mm-hmm.
will kill themselves.
Yeah.
That is an interesting juxtaposition to me.
Yeah. I want to chime in on that little aspect. That mm, I've read studies about post-traumatic stress, but I want to zoom in a little bit on post-traumatic growth because you're sketching the people who commit suicide. But what do you feel that separates? I'm not saying these people are bad or anything, but what separates the people that want to live more? What is it in their mental framework that makes them cope better than these people? What is it that you've seen with your eyes or talked?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad you mentioned post traumatic growth. That's actually my research. My dissertation was in post
Mhm,
traumatic growth. Um, I don't necessarily think that there's one thing that makes one person more uh, able to cope. I mean, we can
mhm.
talk about resilience.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
actually do have a model. I can sketch it, but I think a lot of it comes down to impulsivity. The best way to predict whether someone's going to survive a suicide
Mhm.
attempt is being able to wait. If you give it
Mm,
just a little bit of time,
yeah,
give it a day or two, you're likely not going to do it.
gotcha.
But sometimes there's that impulsive component, especially when you're in your lowest.
Mhm,
That's when you have the thoughts that you want to die.
mhm,
And then maybe the sun comes out and you feel a little bit better.
mhm,
And with just that little bit of energy that comes from feeling better,
mhm.
you're more likely to act on what you were thinking about over the last few
Yeah,
days.
100. Yeah.
So I think impulsivity is, to me, the most frightening component. And if I have
Okay.
somebody who's really hot to kill themselves, I'll have them do push-ups. I'll do push-ups with them.
Mhm.
We'll do some pull-ups. We'll just do anything to just get some of that energy out. But just
Yeah, a
know
state
that
shift.
the
A
more
state
you
shift.
delay the thought, the less likely you do it.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying?
Yeah, like a state shift. I mean, like for example, I've not had like clinical patients or anything, but some friends of mine sometimes were depressed as well, and we would just try to get their attention away from these things and do other things, like a different.
And sometimes that and that doesn't cure. But if they're saying, "Hey, I really think I'm going to kill myself tonight,"
Mhm.
and you say, "Hey, let's go out and let's hang out, let's spend time together. I'm
Yeah.
here with you. Let's do something together." You do have the highest chance for them to go, "I don't think I'm going to do it anymore." They still could, because they can't really predict suicide so much as they can predict risk. But
Mhm.
if you can delay that impulsivity, or just be with them, you can have
Mhm.
a really good outcome. Of course, if somebody tells you that they're suicidal, I would
Mhm.
encourage you to call 911 first and
Yeah,
foremost.
yeah, for
That's the
sure. No,
right
no.
answer.
Yeah, no, I know what
But
you mean.
I say that that's a component of what we can do with our community, is just spend time with them and delay.
Yeah, that's interesting. But mm, I didn't really hear like the big answer. Why people go through post-traumatic growth? Like these, what differentiates them? I didn't hear the answer to that, or maybe I missed that.
Uh, I can show this. So this is actually my model. This is the Perrin model of growth.
Sure.
Uh, I think that if we look at, because everyone's had traumatic experiences. I've
Okay.
had
Yeah.
shitty things happen to me. I'm pretty sure you've had shitty things happen to you that just fundamentally changed who you are as a person.
Yeah.
Sometimes all it takes is a bad day, or the same bad thing happening over and over and over and over and over again, that suddenly, your personality changes, or your value system changes in a fundamental way.
Yeah.
So we can think about we can think about these traumas. This is just the first one. So what that ends up happening is you struggle with it. It's hard. So the struggle component is important. So you
Yeah.
have the event itself and you have the struggle.
Yeah. I get it.
That's really the component, because you can't growth doesn't come from the trauma itself. If you survive a sinking ship, two people, right? Two people survive the same sinking ship. Uh, it's not the surviving of the sinking ship that leads to the growth. It's the struggle with it. It's the going home and being, wide-eyed, going, I could have died today. I could die tomorrow. Really, it's any day that I could die.
Yeah.
That's a very scary reality, and it is
Yeah. For sure.
justifiably scary. But it's through working with that that you come up with the solutions, right? That, well, maybe I shouldn't sleep in tomorrow. Maybe I should start that project that I want
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I know what you mean.
It's through that struggle that you grow. So that's the post-traumatic growth itself.
Okay.
But I see that as raising a bar. When you do grow, you raise a bar, and that bar is resilience.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is you create this cycle where you have the trauma, you have the struggle, you grow, and through that growth, you have resilience. So
Okay.
now that you're a little bit more resilient, the next time you survive your second sinking ship, you'll be
Yeah.
like, this is a breeze. I already know how to handle this. I can
Yeah.
do it.
Mm-hmm.
But then maybe as you get back from that, somebody shoots at you and you
Okay.
haven't coped with that. That's beyond your capacity. That's beyond the skills that you currently have to
Yeah.
cope. So now you don't have the resilience for that. Suddenly, it's a new trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then it
That's an
becomes a
interesting model.
process.
Fuck, that's a cool
Trauma,
model.
struggle, growth, resilience.
Yeah.
Trauma, struggle, growth, resilience.
Interesting
And
model. Yeah.
people kind of get stuck in that struggle. They don't escape it.
Okay. Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they won't. Some
Mm-hmm.
people stay in it for decades. I've
Yeah.
worked with a lot of Vietnam War veterans where
Damn.
they were just coming into therapy for the first time
Shit.
at the
From
50
Vietnam, you
years
said.
of
Yeah.
the so 50 years they did not work on it. So they struggled for 50 years, and then suddenly they have their growth. And I've
I get
watched
it.
it. I've watched them live. I've watched them thrive. I watched them, try to make up for some of the things that they feel guilty that they.
Yeah.
And
Definitely not the problem.
as a result, they're living for the first time in 50 years.
Shit. Thanks for sharing that, Doc. That's a really good model that you showed. I really like that model.
Yeah, I'm glad you like it. It's what gave me my degree.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. I want to like maybe like a rough transition. Talk a little bit about that rambling man vibe that you mentioned. I really liked, for example, pre-recording. You were mentioning how you were traveling from state to state with zero money. Like, tell us a little bit about how does one go about these things. Tell us a little bit rambling stories.
Oh gosh, which ones do
Like
you want
the
me to
real, we
share?
got a real life Jack Reacher, like right here.
So, actually, while I was rambling through the United States, I I actually had a pretty good patron, which was the United States government.
Yeah, for
They
sure.
paid me very well to move around. It it, it they paid me very well to also not stay in the same place for very long.
Sure, sure.
So I anytime I was ready to do something else, they would give me an enormous raise and a move.
Yeah, gotcha.
So
That's a bonus.
I didn't struggle. Yeah, I didn't struggle a lot with the traveling around the country. It was just more of a mentality. I knew that I wasn't going to really build a permanent community there. So it was
Okay.
about developing fast friends, connecting with people in the way that you can connect with them, and then moving on in as healthy way as possible. But I would say that I have a couple of my European stories where I had $0
Mm-hmm.
and I had to cross a few borders No, I shouldn't tell those stories. Um, there were times where I knew that I had to
Yeah.
souvenirs was an issue, and I had to collect a few things that didn't cost money.
Yeah.
You get very creative with gifts. I
Yeah.
think when you're traveling without any money, you can
I
get
get
like
it.
rocks or dirt or glasses or whatever you can fit in some pockets to to bring back and
Yeah.
remember some fond memories. I think
I
there
know
were
what you mean.
nice tongs from, yeah, from a place I went to. Very, very fond memory.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. I can imagine. Like these are these like what when you go to Vegas, what stays in Vegas kind of shit. That's what you were talking about.
More or less, because you know what, I'm really proud that I don't. I think a lot of the things that I did that were more of the what happens in Vegas, stay in Vegas thing was
Yeah.
never really at anyone else's expense. Maybe when
No,
I
for
was
sure.
maybe when I was 19, but I
Yeah.
didn't know any better.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think that when you don't have any money, and though sometimes there's very real danger.
For
Um,
sure. Yeah.
and I think those are the more meaningful experiences, like the first time you have a gun pointed at you and you are not very macho in that moment.
Yeah.
That teaches you a lot about who you are
Yeah.
as a person, um and I think for most people that would scare them off and say, "Hey, I'm never going to do this again," or "I'm going to go back to the United States where I'm
For
I'm
sure.
I'm I'm safe and
Yeah.
I speak the language and I'm a bigger fish in the pond." But to some people, it's that, what else can happen? Like what happens if I go over another mountain? Like
Yeah.
what could be there? And I think that's what pushed me.
Yeah. But what do
I
you
don't think I
think?
answered your question, but I also
No, no.
think that I don't want to give a lot of specifics.
For sure. No. It's also like Hemingway would say, what you don't say says a lot as well. You know what gets implied. What's implied. You know, like the iceberg. Like you mentioned the tip, but a lot gets implied. But it's more like what's so fascinating about this thing you were sketching, like this lifestyle. What was it for you? What do you think it's so fascinating for other people? How do you see that?
Well, I I'm very aware of a culture that existed in the United States in the
Hmm.
60s, 70s, and maybe part of the 80s that was completely gone by the time I was alive, and that was the uh, you hitchhike, you you can just go from town to town, get a job washing a table,
Yeah, for sure.
and stay the night, and then go to another town, and that didn't exist when I was a kid, but I could do that overseas, where
Hmm.
I could go to a mom and pop cobblestone
Yeah, for sure.
pub or restaurant and say, "Hey, do you need someone to wash tables? I need a place to sleep, please." And sometimes I'd come out of that with really great friendships and experiences, and sometimes I'd leave with $0 in my pocket. I'd get there with no money and I'd leave with no money, but it was one of the more meaningful weeks of my life. And I don't think that I couldn't find that in America. I think that kind of there's a lot more suspicion where I grew up, while
Yeah,
there was more understanding, I think, in Central Europe. This was Poland specifically,
yeah,
Poland
yeah,
and Czech Republic, which
yeah.
were that they didn't the money didn't go very money actually went very far there. Like $3 American could feed a whole family
Yeah,
a
yeah,
meal. So
yeah. Hmm. I heard you use the word meaningful. You said something was meaningful in the sense that
mhm.
back home it didn't feel like that or something. Why was it meaningful? Like, can you tell me a little bit about this sentiment, feeling that you have, why it was meaningful?
Oh gosh, that's the $1 million question. I think that's the meaning is the whole purpose of life, and you can't not get meaning from things. Uh, if we have our high highs and we have our low lows in life, and the
Mhm.
best things that happen to us and the worst things that happen to us. But everything in between doesn't really stick. Our
Mhm.
doesn't really stay in our memory, or
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
it floats in and floats out.
Mhm.
But those high highs and those low lows, they stick around. Those memories are hard to get rid of,
Sure, for
and
sure.
they can either upset us, or we can you know get meaning from them. And I think for a lot of it was my coming of, I don't want to say coming of age, but coming into competence, coming into ability. I didn't know what I could do. And I think that until you're put in a position where you are out of your depth, where you are
Mhm.
an imposter, and there's very real risk of danger and harm if you don't get your shit together really
Mhm.
quickly,
Yeah.
that it 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 grows in a way that you come back and you would say, I wouldn't wish that thing to happen to anybody, but I'm glad it happened to me.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. I get it.
And I think that's really the meaning that comes from it. And some of them were because they were very joyous memories. They were very transformative in their positivity, and other because they were very transformative in their horror, or they were transformed in the struggle
Mhm.
of,
Yeah.
of how hard and different it was from the world that I knew.
What do you mean by transformative? Transformative positivity, I heard. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think if we go kind of back into the post-traumatic growth language,
Mhm.
uh,
Yeah.
there's probably the thing that I see more than anything else is belief in self.
Good.
And I, when I work with people who have anxiety, for example, uh, growth is usually exponential. It's not incremental. Once they get through one or two barriers, they they thrive. They blossom into just these beautifully amazing human beings. And I think social anxiety is one of the bigger ones. But anxiety in general, that once you kind of get past something, you thrive. And sometimes you have to be put into very tough situations. In the army basic training, they joke that you come in, a lump of coal, and they squeeze you into a diamond,
Yeah, for sure. Stress.
because
Stress.
it's
Oh, damn. Yeah.
yeah, but it's through that struggle that it's actually not very hard. Everyone can complete basic training,
Yeah.
but it's scary. Yeah, you're constantly on edge. You're not sleeping very well. People are yelling at you, and you're physically exhausted at all times. But when you look back at it, you go, "Wow, I did that, and I could probably do it again." That's very empowering. That's very transformative, and I think that people leaving their comfort zone in general, whether it's to travel overseas or to just have no money in their pocket and just be homeless for a while you try to make a living on your own, that you learn a lot about yourself. You can learn about yourself a lot about yourself really quickly.
Yeah. No, especially
And
like a little bit why I asked you this question was these days you have a lot of young men lost, I was asking this question because they need growth. They need exponential growth.
I'm losing you. I'm sorry.
Okay. I said
Sorry.
these days you have some lost men. Did you hear that part?
Mhm.
They need to have some catalyst, a trigger, like how do they grow? And that was why I was asking this.
I I think I'm picking up what you're putting down now. Yes, because if you're not in a position where you need to step up, will you? I think that's a big question. Like
That's a good one.
there was there, there was a sign I remember fondly that said "complacency kills,"
Mhm.
and it's that the moment you get kind of easy, the moment you get comfortable, you start cutting corners, and the more you cut
Mhm.
corners and get away with it, the more you convince yourself that it's
Yeah.
okay to do it the half-assed
Mhm.
way.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you have a very sedentary lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this a lot with trauma as well, that people isolate, but there's a comfort in this. There's a comfort
Mm-hmm.
in not pushing yourself. There's a comfort in, there's a safety in it. And that's reinforcing. Like when I take time off, or
Okay.
when I go on vacation, I want to keep doing it. It feels good. I want to keep going. But I know that if I did, there would be a point where I'd be broke. They'd be repossessing my stuff, and et cetera, et cetera. I think
Yeah.
that we can kind of see this with a lot of our struggles if we don't. Um, I feel like I'm uh, quoting Mr. Hines here, but if we don't do hard things, we become as soft as our environment.
Mm.
And we live the the 21st century is not very physically demanding. It's not physically demanding to live in the modern era.
Mhm.
And as a result, we're not, as a culture, we're not in the best shape. Americans specifically, I think we're the second most obese country in the world.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that we have to self-impose that. We have to find something that's hard, or we have to put ourselves into hard
Yes.
situations in order to grow. And that's a
Yeah.
weird problem to be in.
Definitely. It's it's that meme. Hard times create soft men, basically.
Hmm.
Hard times create hard men. Hard men create good times, and good times create soft men. And that's where we're now stuck in.
There's something to be said about that, but there's also an awareness that not everybody is having a soft time. I think that what we
Yes.
see mostly is like the middle class American who's typically white, a white middle class American whose
Yeah.
parents are well enough to send them to college. But then there are some people who've spent time as children. Like they've had to be busting their ass. They were around a lot of community violence.
Mhm.
When I was in Chicago, I remember when I was working at a middle school,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
some people drove by and just opened fire into the playground, because those were the next generation of the rival gang. So
Yeah.
it's easier to take them out now. And I remember going in there just horrified, like that's the most horrible thing that you could be exposed to. And these kids were sitting as comfortably as you or I. They're like, oh, this is Chicago. This happens.
Yeah.
This neighborhood. You get gunned down here.
Yeah.
And then the work isn't, hey, let's cope with this trauma. The work is, you shouldn't be okay with that.
Yeah.
That's not a healthy thing to be normal in your environment.
Mhm. Yeah.
So a lot of these people, that anti-fragile concept, that there are
Mhm. Yeah.
people who are in tough circumstances who are now thriving, and I think they're the ones who are set up best for our current situation, because they're the hustlers, they're the producers, they're the ones who don't want comfort.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I love these people. I love them on Twitter. I love seeing them uh working hard, and they're the ones that give me hope for
Yeah.
the future.
Yeah. Definitely.
They it's not it's not soft times for them.
Yeah. I feel you. Yeah. On that note, Doc, we've been talking for an hour now. It's getting a little bit late. Yeah. I just want to. We had a good chat. I really loved the insights that you gave me. I really like that model that you sketched. The model that was really powerful.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for sharing that. Uh, yeah, that alone will help a lot of people if they see that. Um, yeah. Do you have any closing thoughts? Something that you usually this part is reserved for people who want to plug something, promote, but or just closing thoughts, something that we talked about, or anything. The floor is yours.
Sure. Well, I don't really have uh I don't sell anything. My day job keeps me pretty okay, but I am on Twitter at Odysseus, Edyssseus, like our literary hero Odysseus, but my name's Ed. I like to talk about mental health. I like to talk about transformation. And if that's an interest, find me on Twitter. I like people taking apart my ideas.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, on that note, like especially these topics that you brought up, the mental health aspect, the psychology, the transformation, it needs to be talked about more, you know?
Hmm.
So definitely let's open up this conversation. So thank you for your time, Doc.
Yeah, thank you for yours. It was a delight
Yeah,
talking with you.
yeah. Enjoy the rest of your day then. Yeah,
Yeah, enjoy your night.
yeah. Thanks, man.